Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to today's story time. Have you ever heard of a little bird who faced both kindness and cruelty? Well, today we bring you a beautiful folktale from Japan, the Tongue-Cut Sparrow. This is a story about a kind old man, a greedy old woman, and a small sparrow with a big lesson to teach. It is a tale of kindness, greed, and the power of good deeds. As you listen, you will not only enjoy this wonderful story, but also improve your English listening and comprehension skills. So, get comfortable, open your mind, and let's begin the journey into this classic story from Japan, the Tongue-Cut Sparrow. A long time ago in Japan, there lived an old man and his wife. The old man was kind and gentle. He loved all animals and treated them with care. But his wife was very different. She was mean, selfish, and always angry. One day, the old man found a little sparrow in his garden. The poor bird was hurt and could not fly. The old man felt sorry for it. He gently picked it up and took it home. At home, he gave the sparrow food and water. He spoke to it softly and helped it heal. The little bird was happy and chirped sweetly. The old man loved the sparrow like a pet, but his wife did not like it at all. She thought it was useless and a waste of food. Days passed, and the kind old man took good care of the little sparrow. He fed it grains and fresh water every day. Slowly, the sparrow became stronger. It flapped its wings and chirped happily. The old man felt great joy in seeing the small bird recover. He would talk to it as if it were his own child. The sparrow would sit on his shoulder and sing sweet songs. But the old man's wife did not like this at all. She did not care about the little bird. She thought it was a waste of time and food. Whenever she saw her husband feeding the sparrow, she became angry. She scolded him, saying, "Why do you waste food on a useless bird? We don't have enough for ourselves, and yet you give it to this creature." The old man tried to explain. He told her that kindness was important. He said that taking care of others, even small creatures, brought happiness. But his wife did not listen. She only cared about herself. One day, the old man had to go to the forest to work. Before leaving, he told his wife, "Please take care of the sparrow while I am away. Give it some food and water." But as soon as he left, the cruel woman became even more annoyed. She did not want to look after the bird. The little sparrow was hungry and chirped for food. It gently pecked at some rice in the kitchen. When the old woman saw this, she became furious. She shouted at the bird, "How dare you eat my rice?" She ran towards it and grabbed it roughly. The poor sparrow struggled, but it was too small and weak to escape. In her anger, the cruel woman did something terrible. She took a pair of scissors and cut the sparrow's tiny tongue. The little bird cried out in pain, flapping its wings desperately. Blood dripped from its beak. Then, without any pity, the woman threw the sparrow out of the house. The injured bird flew away into the sky, disappearing into the distance. The old woman did not feel sorry for what she had done. Instead, she muttered angrily to herself and went back to her work, not caring about the bird's suffering. When the kind old man returned home in the evening, he was tired from his work in the forest. But as soon as he stepped inside, he looked around for the little sparrow. He expected it to fly to him, chirping happily as it always did. But the house was silent. He could not see the sparrow anywhere. Worried, he asked his wife, "Where is the little sparrow? I told you to take care of it." The old woman crossed her arms and frowned. "That useless bird ate my rice, so I punished it. I cut its tongue and threw it out." The old man's eyes filled with sadness. He could not believe what he had just heard. His heart ached for the poor bird. It had done nothing wrong, and yet it had suffered so much. He felt deep sorrow, thinking about how scared and hurt the little sparrow must have been. Without wasting any time, the old man decided to search for his beloved bird. He walked outside, calling out its name. He walked through the village, looking at every tree and rooftop, hoping to find it, but the sparrow was nowhere to be seen. The next day he decided to go into the forest. He walked for hours, carefully looking at every branch and listening for the sound of a familiar chirp. He asked the other birds, "Have you seen my little sparrow?" He asked the wind, "Have you carried my sparrow far away?" But there was no answer. Even though he was old and tired, he did not give up. He kept walking deeper into the forest, hoping that somehow he would find his small friend. The trees grew taller, and the sunlight barely reached the ground. The path was rough, but he did not stop. Finally, after walking for a long time, he heard something, a soft, gentle chirping sound. His heart filled with hope. He followed the sound until he reached a beautiful part of the forest. There, hidden among the trees, was a small, lovely house made of wood and leaves. The sound was coming from inside. The old man stepped closer, and suddenly, the door opened. To his great joy, the little sparrow appeared at the entrance. Its tongue was still injured, but it was alive. The sparrow's eyes shone with happiness when it saw its kind old friend. It flapped its wings and chirped as best as it could. The old man's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of happiness. He stretched out his hands, and the little sparrow flew onto his shoulder, just like before. It gently nuzzled against his face, as if thanking him for coming. Then, something unexpected happened. From inside the small house, many other sparrows appeared. They were all looking at the old man with kindness. It seemed that this place was a secret home for sparrows. The little bird had found a new family. The old man smiled, knowing that his small friend was not alone. One of the sparrows, who seemed to be the leader, stepped forward and spoke in a soft voice. "Dear old man, thank you for your kindness to our little friend. Please, come inside and rest. You are welcome in our home." The old man was surprised to hear the sparrow talk, but he was not afraid. He bowed respectfully and stepped inside. The house was warm and filled with the soft sounds of birds. The sparrows brought him food and water, treating him with great care. He had never seen anything like this before. A secret world where sparrows lived like a family. As he sat down, the little sparrow chirped happily beside him. The old man felt at peace, knowing that his kindness had led him to this wonderful place. The old man sat inside the sparrow's house, feeling warm and welcomed. He looked around in amazement. The house was beautifully made of wood, leaves, and soft feathers. Small lanterns glowed softly, filling the room with a gentle light. The air smelled fresh, like the forest after rain. He had never imagined that birds could have such a wonderful home. The sparrows treated him with great kindness. They brought him small plates of food, fresh fruits, nuts, and seeds. They also gave him a cup of cool, clear water. Even though it was simple, the old man felt grateful. He smiled and thanked them. The leader of the sparrows sat beside him and spoke gently. "We have heard about your kindness. You saved our little sister when she was hurt. You fed her and gave her shelter. She loves you very much." The old man looked at the little sparrow sitting on his shoulder. It chirped softly, rubbing its head against his cheek. He felt a deep warmth in his heart. The leader continued, "We also know what your wife did. She was cruel to our little sister. She hurt her and threw her away. But you, dear old man, have a good heart. That is why we want to thank you." The old man shook his head humbly. "I only did what was right. Every creature deserves kindness." The sparrows nodded in agreement. Then the leader clapped his wings, and suddenly a group of sparrows flew in, carrying two large, beautifully decorated boxes. One was small and light, while the other was big and heavy. The sparrows placed them before the old man. The leader said, "We would like to give you a gift. You may choose one of these boxes to take home. The small one is light and easy to carry, while the large one is heavy and full." The old man looked at both boxes. He did not want to be greedy. He was old, and carrying a heavy box would be difficult. He also felt that he had already received enough kindness from the sparrows. So he smiled and pointed to the small box. "This one is enough for me. I do not need more." The sparrows were pleased with his choice. They nodded and said, "You have chosen wisely. We hope this gift brings you happiness." The old man picked up the small box. It was beautifully tied with soft ribbons made of grass and flower petals. He bowed deeply to the sparrows and thanked them. "I am grateful for your kindness. I will never forget this day." The little sparrow chirped happily and flew beside him as he stepped out of the sparrow's home. The leader and the other sparrows bowed their heads, watching him leave. As the old man walked back through the forest, he felt peaceful. He did not know what was inside the box, but that did not matter to him. He had found his little friend, and that was the greatest gift of all. The trees swayed gently in the wind, and the birds sang sweet songs as if they were guiding him home. When he finally reached his house, the sun was beginning to set. The warm glow of the evening light covered everything in gold. He slowly stepped inside, still holding the small box in his hands. As the old man stepped into his home, he placed the small box on the wooden table. His wife, who had been resting, looked up and noticed the box in his hands. She frowned and walked over to him. "Where have you been all day?" she asked in an irritated voice. "And what is that in your hands?" The old man sighed and sat down. He was tired from his journey, but his heart was still full of happiness. He looked at his wife and said, "I went to search for the little sparrow. After walking for a long time, I finally found it. The sparrow is safe and happy in a beautiful home deep in the forest. The other sparrows welcomed me warmly and gave me this gift as a token of their gratitude." The wife scoffed. "A gift? From a bunch of useless birds? What could they possibly give you that is worth anything?" The old man ignored her harsh words and slowly untied the ribbons on the box. As he lifted the lid, his eyes widened in surprise. The box was filled with gold coins, pearls, and sparkling gems. The light from the setting sun made the jewels shine like fire. The wife gasped, unable to believe what she was seeing. She quickly reached into the box and grabbed a handful of gold coins. Letting them slip through her fingers, her greedy eyes shone brighter than the gems themselves. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice now filled with excitement. The old man smiled gently and said, "It is a gift from the sparrows. They wanted to thank me for helping their little friend." The wife's mind was now filled with greed. She could not think of anything except the treasure. She turned to her husband and asked, "You said they gave you a choice between two boxes. Is that right?" The old man nodded. "Yes, they offered me a large, heavy box and this small one. I chose the small one because I did not want to be greedy." The wife's face twisted into an expression of hunger and desire. "You fool!" she shouted. "You should have chosen the big one. That must have had even more gold and jewels inside." The old man sighed. He had expected this reaction from his wife. "I was happy with what they gave me," he said calmly. "We have more than enough now. We do not need anything else." But the wife was not satisfied. She was already thinking of how she could get the bigger box for herself. She did not care about kindness, gratitude, or the sparrows. She only cared about gold. Early the next morning, before the old man even woke up, the wife packed some food and set off into the forest. She did not tell her husband where she was going. She was determined to find the sparrow's home and demand the bigger box for herself. She walked quickly, ignoring the beauty of the trees and the songs of the birds. Her mind was filled with greed, and she only thought about how rich she would become. After some time, she finally reached the deep part of the forest where the sparrows lived. She looked around and saw the small wooden house, just as her husband had described. She rushed to the door and knocked loudly. "Open up!" she shouted impatiently. "I have come to see the sparrows." The door opened, and the leader of the sparrows appeared, looking calm and wise. "Welcome," he said politely. "How may we help you?" The wife forced a fake smile onto her face. "I heard that you gave my husband a treasure," she said sweetly, "and I heard that you offered him a choice between two boxes, but he was foolish and chose the small one. I have come to take the big one." The sparrows looked at each other. They could see the greed in her eyes. They knew she had no kindness in her heart, but they were polite and did not refuse her request. "If that is what you wish," the leader of the sparrows said, "then we will give you the big box. But remember, Once you take it, you must not open it until you return home." The wife nodded quickly, pretending to agree. She did not care about their warning. She just wanted the treasure. The sparrows brought out the large, heavy box. It was much bigger than the one the old man had received. The woman's eyes gleamed with greed as she grabbed it. She could hardly wait to see what was inside. She thanked the sparrows, but her voice was filled with false sweetness. Then, without another word, she turned around and started her journey back home. The box was heavy, and it was difficult to carry, but she did not stop. She was too excited. As she walked, curiosity grew inside her. She thought about the smaller box her husband had brought home. If that little box had so much gold, then this big one must be filled with even greater riches. She could not control herself any longer. Even though the sparrows had warned her, she decided to open the box right there in the middle of the forest. She placed the box on the ground and untied the ribbons quickly. Her hands were shaking with excitement as she lifted the lid. But the moment she opened the box, she let out a loud scream. Inside, there was no gold, no pearls, no jewels. Instead, a swarm of horrible creatures jumped out. Large, black spiders with hairy legs crawled toward her. Snakes with open mouths hissed and slithered out. Giant insects with sharp claws buzzed angrily. The woman's heart filled with terror. She tried to run, but the creatures chased her. She screamed and fell to the ground, covering her face as the swarm surrounded her. The sound of buzzing and hissing filled her ears. She had been blinded by greed, and now she was facing the consequences of her own actions. The woman lay on the ground, shaking with fear as the horrible creatures swarmed around her. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled as she pushed herself up and stumbled backward. The spiders crawled toward her with their long, hairy legs. The snakes slithered, hissing loudly, their forked tongues flickering in the air. The buzzing insects flapped their wings angrily, their sharp claws reaching toward her. Her heart pounded. She had never been so terrified in her life. She turned and ran as fast as she could, crashing through the trees and bushes, her breath coming in short gasps. The heavy box was forgotten. She no longer cared about treasure. All she wanted was to escape. Branches scratched her face. Her clothes tore as she pushed through the thick undergrowth. The sound of hissing, buzzing, and crawling filled the air behind her. She dared not look back. She ran and ran, her legs aching, her chest burning. Finally, after what felt like hours, she burst out of the forest and into the open fields near her home. The sun was high in the sky, shining down on her, but she felt no warmth. Her whole body was cold with fear. She collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, her hair messy, her hands shaking. She looked behind her. The creatures were gone. She was safe, but she did not feel relief. Instead, a deep, heavy feeling settled in her chest. She had been greedy. She had ignored the kindness of the sparrows. She had disrespected their generosity, and now she had paid the price. Slowly, She picked herself up and dragged herself home. Her legs felt weak, her body sore. She had left that cursed box in the forest. She never wanted to see it again. When she reached her house, she saw her husband sitting outside, quietly tending to the garden. He looked up and saw her in her torn, dirty clothes, her face pale with fear. He rushed to her side. "What happened?" he asked, concern in his voice. "Where have you been?" The woman did not answer right away. She lowered her head. Ashamed, she thought about how cruel she had been to him, how she had called him a fool, how she had only cared about wealth. But now, after what she had experienced, she finally understood. Tears welled up in her eyes. She sat down beside him and took a deep breath. Then, for the first time, she told him everything. She told him how she had secretly gone to the forest, how she had demanded the bigger box, and how she had ignored the sparrow's warning. She told him about the creatures that had attacked her, the fear she had felt, and how she had barely escaped. The old man listened patiently, not interrupting. When she finished speaking, silence filled the air between them. The woman wiped her tears, expecting him to scold her, but he did not. Instead, he sighed and said gently, "Now you understand." She looked at him, confused. He continued, "Greed leads to suffering. The sparrows gave me a choice just as they gave you one. I chose the small box because I was happy with what I had. But you wanted more, and that led to your misfortune." The woman lowered her head again. She felt deep shame. She had always thought that wealth was the most important thing in life. But now, she realized that kindness, humility, and gratitude mattered far more. She looked at her husband, the man she had often mistreated, and for the first time in many years, she felt truly grateful for him. He had always been kind, patient, and content with what they had. She, on the other hand, had been selfish and cruel. She took his hands in hers, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I have been a terrible wife. I was blinded by greed, but I see things clearly now. I don't want to live like this anymore." The old man smiled softly. "It is never too late to change." From that day on, the woman was different. She no longer complained about their simple home or their modest life. She worked beside her husband in the garden, preparing meals with care, speaking with kindness. The greed that had once filled her heart slowly disappeared, replaced by something else. Peace. The gold and jewels from the sparrow's gift remained untouched in their home. They did not waste it on unnecessary luxuries. Instead, they used it wisely, helping those in need, sharing with their neighbors, and living a life of gratitude. And though the woman still remembered the terrifying experience in the forest, she no longer felt bitterness. Instead, she was thankful, because in the end, the lesson she had learned was far more valuable than any treasure. The old woman's life had changed, but the memory of her greed still haunted her. Every night, she lay awake, thinking about the choice she had made. She had lost everything because of her selfishness. The riches she had desired so much had turned into a terrifying nightmare. the crawling creatures, the hissing snakes, the buzzing insects. She could still hear their sounds in her head. She had thought she could take more than she deserved. But the sparrows had taught her a painful lesson. She no longer argued with her husband or complained about their simple life. She woke up early in the morning, helped him with his daily tasks, and prepared meals with care. The old man noticed the change in her. She spoke softly, treated him with kindness, and no longer demanded anything from him. For the first time in years, there was peace in their home. One day, as she sat outside their small house, she watched the birds flying freely in the sky. She thought about the sparrow she had once hurt. The memory of cutting its tongue filled her with guilt. She had been cruel, and yet the sparrows had still shown her kindness. They had given her a choice, just as they had given her husband, but she had failed their test. She had been foolish and greedy. She sighed and turned to her husband. "Do you think the little sparrow is still alive?" she asked. The old man looked up from his work and smiled. "Sparrows are strong creatures," he said. "Even when they are hurt, they find a way to survive." The woman lowered her head. "I wish I could take back what I did," she whispered. "I wish I could tell the little sparrow that I am sorry." The old man placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Regret alone does not change the past," he said, "but kindness can change the future." His words stayed with her. She thought about them as she went about her daily chores. She knew she could never undo the harm she had caused, but perhaps she could make up for it in another way. The next morning, she went into the forest. She carried a small basket filled with rice and water. As she walked, she listened to the sounds of nature. The rustling leaves, the chirping birds, the soft whispers of the wind. For the first time, she felt a deep connection with the world around her. She reached the place where the sparrows had once welcomed her. The trees stood tall, their branches swaying gently. The air was fresh and cool. She knelt down and placed the basket on the ground. "I do not ask for anything," she said softly. "I only wish to give." She left the food and water there, hoping that the sparrows would find it. Then, she stood up and turned to leave. But just as she was about to walk away, she heard a familiar sound. A soft, gentle chirp. Her heart raced. She looked around, searching for the source of the sound, and then, from the branches above, she saw it. A tiny sparrow with a small scar on its beak. It was the same sparrow she had once hurt. Tears filled her eyes. She fell to her knees and bowed her head. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I was cruel to you. I was selfish, but I have changed. Please forgive me." The sparrow tilted its head as if listening. Then, it fluttered down from the branch and landed near the basket of food. It pecked at the rice, chirping softly. The woman watched in silence, afraid to move. She did not want to scare it away. After a few moments, the sparrow lifted its head and looked at her. It did not fly away. It did not show fear. Instead, it simply stayed there, eating peacefully. A deep sense of relief washed over the woman. She knew that the sparrow would never speak human words, It would never tell her if it forgave her, but in its own quiet way, it had accepted her offering. It had chosen not to fly away in fear. She wiped her tears and smiled. For the first time in a long time, she felt light. The weight of her guilt had begun to lift. As she walked back home, she realized something important. Kindness was not about seeking forgiveness or expecting rewards. It was about giving without asking for anything in return. It was about choosing to do what was right, even when no one was watching. From that day on, the old woman made it a habit to visit the forest. She brought food for the birds, tended to the plants, and sat quietly, listening to the sounds of nature. She found peace in these small acts of kindness. She no longer cared about wealth or riches. She no longer wanted gold or jewels. All she wanted was to live the rest of her life with a kind heart, making up for the mistakes of her past. The days passed, and the old woman continued her visits to the forest. Every morning, she would prepare a small offering of rice and water, carefully wrapping it in a cloth before setting out on her walk. She no longer saw these visits as a duty or an attempt to seek forgiveness. Instead, they became a part of her life, something she did with sincerity and without expectation. At first, the sparrows remained cautious. They watched her from a distance, chirping softly as she placed the food under the trees. She did not try to get close to them or call them near. She simply set the food down, bowed her head in respect, and left. Slowly, the birds began to trust her presence. Some of them flew closer, hopping around her feet as she laid down the grains. Others perched on the branches above, tilting their heads curiously. One day, as she was about to leave, the little sparrow she had once harmed fluttered down and landed near her. She held her breath, afraid to move. The tiny bird pecked at the rice, then looked up at her. For the first time, she noticed how bright its eyes were, how small and delicate its wings seemed. She smiled, though she knew the sparrow would never understand the depth of her emotions. But that did not matter. The seasons changed. The leaves turned golden, then fell to the ground in crisp, dry sheets. Winter arrived with cold winds, and yet the woman still made her way to the forest, wrapping herself in warm clothes. The birds grew fewer during this time, some flying to warmer places, but a few remained, including the little sparrow. It had become a silent companion, always appearing whenever she came. She had stopped thinking of herself as someone seeking forgiveness. Instead, she now saw herself as someone who wished to care for these creatures, to offer them something in return for the harm she had once caused. One evening, as she sat outside her small house, watching the sky turn shades of deep orange and purple, she turned to her husband. "Do you think I have changed?" she asked softly. The old man looked at her with gentle eyes. "Yes," he said. "You are not the same woman you once were." She lowered her gaze. "I only wish I had learned this lesson sooner." He nodded. "Perhaps," he said, "but change does not come to those who refuse to see their mistakes. You saw yours. That is what matters." She thought about his words. She had spent so much of her life filled with anger, greed, and impatience. She had treated her husband poorly, hurt an innocent creature, and let her desires control her. But now, she no longer wanted wealth. She no longer dreamed of riches or treasures. Her heart felt lighter, freer. The next morning, as she made her way to the forest, she felt a new sense of purpose. The path she walked was the same. The trees stood as they always had, but everything felt different. She felt different. When she reached her usual spot, she placed the food down and sat on a nearby rock, listening to the quiet sounds of the forest. The wind rustled through the branches, the leaves whispered against each other, and the distant call of birds echoed through the trees. Then, she heard a flutter of wings. The little sparrow landed just a few feet away, but this time it did not simply eat and leave. Instead, it hopped toward her, stopping right in front of her. She did not move. She barely breathed. The tiny bird tilted its head. Then, to her surprise, it chirped softly and fluttered onto her shoulder. A tear slipped down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. She simply sat there, feeling the warmth of the small creature against her. She knew then that she had been forgiven. Maybe not in words, maybe not in the way she had once imagined, but in that quiet moment, in that simple act of trust. She understood. She had finally made things right. The woman had come to understand that true change could not be measured in gold or jewels. It was not about the rewards or the treasures one received, but about the peace one found within. She no longer sought approval from others, nor did she chase after things that she once believed would bring her happiness. What mattered now was the simple act of kindness, the ability to give without expecting anything in return. One afternoon, as the woman sat by the edge of the forest, a small group of sparrows fluttered around her. They chirped happily as they pecked at the rice she had left for them. This time, however, she noticed something different. The birds seemed to trust her completely. They no longer kept their distance. They flew close, landing on the ground beside her and even perching on the tree branches above her. It was as if they had accepted her completely, without any fear or hesitation. The woman smiled softly as she watched them. She remembered the times when she had tried to get close to the birds, when she had wanted to see them up close, but they had always flown away. Now it felt as if they had made the choice to stay. It was a gift she could never have asked for. And yet, it was one that meant more to her than any treasure or reward could. As the weeks passed, she began to notice other small changes in her life. The old man, too, had become more peaceful. He no longer spoke with anger or frustration, and his heart seemed lighter. They would sit together in the evenings, talking about their simple life, and for the first time they both felt content. One day, as they were sitting together, the old man turned to her and said, "You have changed in a way I never imagined possible." The woman smiled gently. "I did not change because I wanted something. I changed because I needed to." The old man nodded. "And you did not just change yourself, but you brought peace to our home. Your kindness has made all the difference." She thought about his words. She had spent so many years believing that life was about striving for something greater, always wanting more. But now, she understood that true happiness was not found in what one had, but in how one lived. It was found in the simple moments, in the kindness shared, and in the quiet acts of love and care. One evening, as she walked back from the forest, she saw a small bundle of feathers lying on the ground. She knelt down and gently touched the bird. It was the same sparrow that had once come to her for help. This time, it lay still, its little wings no longer fluttering. Her heart ached as she looked at the small creature. She had grown so fond of it, but as she picked it up and cradled it in her hands, she felt a sense of peace. The sparrow had lived a full life, and in its final moments, it had returned to her. She buried the bird in a small patch of earth under the trees, speaking softly to it as she did. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me the way." As she stood up and looked around, she noticed something. The other sparrows were not flying away. They had gathered around her, as if to show their support, their friendship. She smiled, knowing that her journey of kindness had come full circle. From that day forward, the woman continued to visit the forest. She still brought food for the birds and sat quietly under the trees. But now she did so with a heart full of gratitude. She had learned that kindness was not just about giving. It was about understanding, about listening, and about being present for others. And in that simple truth, she found a happiness that no treasure could ever replace. The woman's life had changed in ways she never thought possible. Once, she had been filled with greed and selfishness, always wanting more, never satisfied with what she had. But now, she lived each day with a heart that had learned to appreciate the simplest joys. She still woke up early every morning, but instead of worrying about riches or complaining about small inconveniences, she started her day with a quiet moment of gratitude. She would sit outside her small home, feeling the warmth of the morning sun on her face, listening to the chirping of birds in the distance. She would think about how much she had learned, about how different she felt now. Her husband, too, had noticed the change. Their home was no longer filled with arguments or bitterness. Instead, there was peace between them. They worked together, sharing their daily tasks with kindness and patience. The old man no longer had to fear his wife's anger, and she no longer looked down on him. They had finally become true companions, living in harmony with each other. One day, as the woman prepared to visit the forest again, she thought about the little sparrow that had once suffered because of her. Even though it was no longer there, she felt its presence in the trees, in the wind, in the soft rustling of the leaves. It had given her a second chance, a chance to become a better person. When she arrived at the usual spot, she placed a handful of rice on the ground, as she had done every day. But this time, she did something different. She sat down and gently spread the rice with her hands, making sure each tiny grain was placed with care. It was a small act, but it carried deep meaning. As she watched the birds flutter down to eat, she realized something important. She had once thought kindness was something one did to receive a reward, that good deeds always led to material gifts. But now she knew that true kindness expected nothing in return. It was not about gold or treasures. It was about the peace it brought to one's heart. The days turned into months, and the woman continued to visit the forest, feeding the birds, sitting among the trees, and reflecting on her journey. She no longer sought forgiveness because she knew she had already found it. Not from the sparrows, not from her husband, but from within herself. One evening, as she and the old man sat outside their home, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky, she spoke softly. "I used to believe that happiness came from having more," she said, "but now I know that it comes from giving, from sharing, from understanding." The old man nodded. "And from knowing when enough is enough." She smiled. "Yes, I do not need gold. I do not need riches. What I have now is far greater than any treasure." The wind blew gently, carrying the distant sound of chirping birds. She closed her eyes and let the moment fill her heart. She had learned the greatest lesson of all, that kindness and compassion were the real treasures of life, and they were worth more than anything else in the world. That's the end of the story. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more exciting tales. Check out our other videos and share your thoughts in the comments. Stay tuned for the next adventure. Thanks for watching.